Hey there, it's Laria. In this video, I want to talk about mana management, and some of these tips are specifically for Resto Druids, but others are applicable to other healers. There are a couple of really easy ways to manage your mana and to get mana back, like using a mana potion or using Innervate, but I want to also go over a few other ways that you can kind of optimize your mana while still doing really good healing in a raid group. The first tip I have to manage your mana has to do with knowing your rotation, knowing which abilities to prioritize, and knowing what to use depending on the type of damage that's going out in a raid group. And this tip has a couple of different parts. If I were to just go into a raid group and just spam regrowth on everybody every time damage went out, I would run out of mana. So that has to do with knowing your rotation. You have to know what abilities to press and when to press them in order to optimize your mana and to actually do some healing that's going to help out your raid group. And you should know that as a Resto Druid, your Life Bloom should be on the active tank, you should be using Wild Growth when 5 or more players have taken damage, or use it right as damage goes out, and you should be applying rejuves to people who are taking damage. Item level in this game somewhat matters, but honestly what it comes down to is doing your rotation correctly. Overall though, if you're doing normal or heroic, item level doesn't matter too much. It really comes down to your rotation and knowing if you are pressing the right buttons. You are optimizing your mana by knowing what to press during certain times. Is there a lot of damage going out? Yes, okay, then I should spend a little bit more mana during those moments. Is there not a lot of damage going out? Then maybe I should just make sure that I have a couple of rejuves out. So when I say know your rotation, that's what I mean. It really doesn't come down to item level that much when I'm talking about rotation, because the rotation is pretty much the same in a raid setting, whether you're 195 or 200 item level or 215 or 220 item level. You need to make sure that you are doing your rotation correctly, that you're using the right spells at the right moments, and that you're not wasting mana by spamming too many regrowths. You could have all the best gear for your spec, but if you're not doing your rotation correctly and you're not using your abilities correctly, then you're not optimizing your healing or your mana. Similarly, the next tip I have is knowing which abilities to prioritize. If I see a ton of raid damage that goes out, I'm not just going to spam regrowth on the entire raid group. Actually, in fact, I take the talent Abundance usually in raids, and Abundance affects your rejuves and your regrowths. And I have a weak aura that tells me how many rejuves I have out, and it also tells me the amount of increased crit chance that my regrowths do. So take for example Lady Innervate Darkvein. If I see that someone is about to empty one of the containers, I'm going to start ramping as a Resto Druid by getting some rejuves out, because that will increase my abundance. It'll increase my crit chance that my regrowths will do. So when the container is emptied and the whole raid starts taking damage, I already have rejuves out, and if I need some focus healing on some players, I already have an increased crit chance on my regrowths, so then I can start using regrowth. So situations like this kind of show you how you can prioritize certain spells and when. If there isn't that much damage going out, I'm not going to spam regrowths, but if a container is emptied on Darkvein and the entire raid group is taking damage from that, then I can prioritize regrowth because I've already planned for it. I'm already using a talent that I know affects my rejuves and regrowths, and I'm planning that. Knowing what and when to cast over other abilities will definitely help with your mana management. The next part of this tip is knowing which cooldowns to use for certain damage. Healers in general usually have a couple of major healing cooldowns. So for Resto Druids, I have Tranquility, but it's on a 3-minute cooldown. So every time the raid takes massive damage, I can't use Tranquility every single time. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. But those players still need to be healed, right? So you need to know which healing cooldowns you can use at certain points to heal them back up. An example that comes to mind is Mythic Hungering Destroyer. Usually as a Resto Druid, I Tranquility right as the Desolate cast finishes so that I can top everybody back off. My Asthma might be swapping to new players. I might need to heal up some players before Expunge goes off. And knowing this, I probably don't want to use Tranquility maybe when the boss is casting Consume, because Consume kind of pulls you back into the boss. So if I have to stop and I get out away from the boss and start casting Tranquility at that point, then I'm not allowed to move. It'll cancel my Tranquility channel. So knowing which cooldowns to use during certain parts of the fight will also help you optimize your healing and your mana, because you'll know when to use those big cooldowns and save some of that mana. Another tip is to know when to ramp as a Resto Druid, and know when to kind of step back from healing for a little bit during certain parts of the fight, especially if there isn't really any damage going out. And the fight that comes to mind is Heroic and Mythic Sludge Fist. Sludge Fist on Heroic and Mythic is a great example of this. So you'll notice that there isn't a lot of healing really in the first half of the fight. The healing kind of ramps up towards the end of the fight, and really, the only healing that needs to be done on Heroic Sludge Fist or even Mythic Sludge Fist, it comes from either players standing in the rubble that's on the ground or if they stood in Chain Slam. Other than that, all the other mechanics are one-shots. If you stand too close to the boss when he slams, you're dead. If you stand in front of him when he's about to slam into a pillar, you're dead. So really the healing in the beginning of that fight really just comes to players kind of taking raid-wide AoE damage or standing in something they shouldn't be standing in. So you know that during these kind of low damage points of the fight, you can be DPSing the boss, or maybe as a Resto Druid, you're throwing out a couple of rejuves on players. Again, you're keeping Life Bloom on the tank. And then you know when to ramp, because most of the healing that you're going to have to do is when the boss slams into a pillar. So if you look at my guild's kill video, which I will link somewhere up here, you'll see that the healing isn't that intensive on the first half of the fight. The first pillar, the second pillar smash, we take damage from it, but it's not anything that's super intensive. You'll see later on in the fight between the third and fourth pillar hits and after the fourth pillar hit that I use a ton of mana in a very short amount of time because the whole raid group is taking a ton of damage. So knowing when to ramp either as a Disc Priest or a Resto Druid, any kind of proactive healer who has a playstyle like that, you will end up saving mana because you're anticipating when the whole raid group is going to be taking damage, when you can kind of spend those moments spending more mana, and then the moments where you're not taking a ton of damage, you can regenerate a little bit more mana by casting Smite or by casting Wrath. The next couple of tips that I have are quick and easy to help with your mana management. The first tip I have has to do with Resto Druids and using your Clearcast procs. Clearcast is when you basically get a free regrowth to use. And even if there isn't damage going out on a fight, what I usually do if there isn't really anyone to heal is I'll use that Clearcast proc on one of the tanks, because you know that the tanks are going to be taking some kind of consistent damage, even if the boss or the adds on a fight aren't hitting that hard. You know that they are taking a little bit of damage. So just making sure that you're tracking your Clearcast procs, whether you're just kind of looking for that buff or whether you're using a weak aura, somehow know when you have a Clearcast proc and make sure you use them, because again, it is a free regrowth that you can just use on anybody. Another straightforward tip to consider is using Innervate correctly. If you are a Resto Druid, this means figuring out the times that you want to use Innervate. If it's a longer fight, you can usually get away with using 2 Innervates on a fight. So knowing when you want to use that first Innervate, the second Innervate, knowing what times in the fight that you are going to benefit from using it the most. If you're not a Resto Druid and you're another healer class and you have a balanced Druid in the raid group, work with them to kind of figure out when you want to get that Innervate from them. But if you're using Innervate on yourself, or you are a healer class and you're calling for Innervate from another Druid, make sure that you know how you're going to use that Innervate. It's only 10 seconds, it's really not that long. So if you get Innervate after you've called for it, and you're a Resto Druid, don't then immediately go and use Convoke the Spirits, because that's a waste of mana. Convoke the Spirits is a 4-second channel, so that is wasting just about half of the Innervate that you have. So make sure that when you are planning on using your Innervate, you also know what spells you're going to use in that 10-second Innervate window. An example that comes to mind has to do with Disc Priests on either Mythic Council of Blood or Mythic Stone Legion Generals, because usually Disc Priests ramp ahead of time. And a lot of times they are trying to plan out how they're going to use Spirit Shell with what major abilities are happening on the boss fight. So a Disc Priest is going to want to call Innervate about 10 seconds before that damage goes out, because you want to make sure that you're getting about 6 to 8 atonements out, you're using both of your Radiance charges, and that ends up being between 8 and 10 seconds or so ideally, and then you're following that up with Spirit Shell. So if you hadn't called for Innervate, you'd be using a ton of mana to get all of these atonements out, and instead, if you can plan ahead of time and use Innervate correctly, know 1, when to call for it, and 2, what abilities to use within that Innervate window, then you're going to be saving yourself a ton of mana. Another tip I have is about using mana potions. And in Shadowlands, we have two different mana potions that we can use. We have Potion of Spiritual Clarity, which is the one that requires you to sit down and channel the potion for 10 seconds. And once the 10 seconds is up, you get 10,000 mana back. And the alternative to this is just an instant mana potion that is called Spiritual Mana Potion. It gives you 6,000 mana back. So you can use either one of these potions. It kind of depends how much mana you want to get back. If it's towards the end of a fight and you're running low on mana and you just want like a quick mana potion to use, I would use a Spiritual Mana Potion. If it's a longer fight, like something like Mythic Council of Blood or Mythic Stone Legion Generals, something that is a much longer fight, you can actually get 2 uses out of your channeled mana pot. So for what I do during Council of Blood and Stone Legion Generals is I'll use my first channeled mana pot kind of early on in the fight because it's on a 5-minute cooldown. And I know that somewhere kind of towards the end of the fight, 5 minutes from now, I'll be able to sit down and channel another mana potion for 10 seconds and get 10,000 more mana back. I want to go over a couple things about using the channeled mana potion that might be tricky for some people, because it can be tricky to find a time during a fight where there isn't a lot of healing that's required. If you choose the wrong time to sit down and start channeling a 10-second pot and you are needed to heal the raid, then you picked a bad time to sit down and channel that mana potion, and that's not good. It can be a little bit tricky. Another example that comes to mind is on Darkvein. And on this fight, if you choose the wrong moment to sit down and channel this 10-second mana potion and you didn't look at your DBM timers, there could be an ability coming up that could target you and force you to move and then cancel your channel, and then you don't end up getting the mana back. So the example that came to mind is Shared Suffering on Lady Innervate Darkvein. If you sat down to channel your mana pot and 2 seconds later Shared Suffering goes out and you have to get up and you're forced to do geometry, then you don't actually get that mana back. And another example that came to mind is on Artificer Zymox. If you sat down to channel your mana pot, and again, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 seconds later, maybe you only get half of your mana pot out, and you get targeted with a portal, then you have to book it to wherever your raid lead wants those portals, and it means that you, again, have to interrupt your channel. So that can be the tricky part about using channeled mana potions, is that, one, you have to make sure that the raid isn't taking damage. You have to make sure that, if you're going to sit down, that the other healers can continue healing, that you aren't needed to keep the raid up. And the second tricky part about using channeled mana potions is finding a time during the fight which aligns with the first part I just mentioned, and knowing that there aren't any abilities coming up that could target you and interrupt your channel. I have 3 more mana management tips for you. If you're a Holy Priest, remember to use Symbol of Hope, which restores mana to everyone near you. If you're a Resto Shaman, remember to use Mana Tide Totem, which increases your raid members' mana regeneration. As a Resto Shaman, you can also apply Water Shield, which will give you some mana back. I hope these tips have helped you understand how to manage your mana a little bit better. Let me know in the comments which class you play, and also let me know if there are any other mana management tips that I might have missed in this video.